I'm fortunate enough to sit with Kati Preston, who is a Holocaust survivor, and I could say is a good friend of mine. And we're talking to her about a video we're going to run on Holocaust Memorial Day in December. Kati, could you tell us a little bit about your family before the Holocaust?
Well, I was born in Transylvania. At the time I was persecuted, it was Hungary. Now it's Romania, the same place. I come from an unusual family because my mother was Catholic and my father was Jewish, which wasn't done in those days. So consequently, I was persecuted by both religions. And nobody wanted them to get married. And my parents doted on me. I was an only child. My mother was a dressmaker, very successful. She had 45 girls working for her. And my father had a wholesale fish business in our town. He had great big cages of carp in the river that went through our town, and he would wholesale them. And I remember as a little girl, there was always a carp swimming in our bath. We used to eat a lot of them. I loved them. And I had a wonderful childhood. I had absolutely everything. I was treated like a princess. And then things started to change, when the Nazis came to power, all our liberties were eroded. Jews were no longer allowed to go to college. They were no longer allowed to teach in a college. Kids were no longer allowed to go to any school other than Jewish school. Jewish doctors were not allowed to treat non-Jews, and women under the age of 45 were not allowed to work for a Jewish home. So suddenly everybody started disappearing. All the people who used to work for my parents, and people were disappearing. And the Hungarian authorities were very smart. They had the Jews all register with the police, saying they would protect us because they wanted to know where everybody was. So when the time came to deport people, it was very simple. They just went to everybody's house and gathered them up. I was saved by a very simple peasant girl, a Christian peasant girl who used to bring our milk. She was an orphan, and my mother had gifted her a wedding dress when she got married. And when she heard that they're taking the Jews away, she came to see my mother and asked to hide me. Because my mother, although she converted to Judaism, she didn't have to go to the camps or to the ghetto, because they only took people who were Jewish by blood. And therefore, I was supposed to die too. As long as you had even one Jewish grandparent, you were supposed to go. And so my mother decided that they won't miss one little girl, and she hid me at home when this woman came and she took me to her farm. And my mother must have been very brave to just hand over her only child to a woman to save, but she did it, and off we went. And I remember it took a long time. I was sitting on this cart with her. There was a little bench, and she even let me hold the reins of the horse for a while. And when we got to her farmhouse was on the side of a hill, and as you entered, there was a very small barn with a stall for the cow, one for the horse, with the hay above it. And she got me out of the cart and she says, "No, my dear, you're staying here. You can't come to my house because people want to kill you." When you're 5 years old, you don't understand somebody wanting to kill you. I'm 82, and I still think death is something that happens to other people, not to me. I ignore it. But I was shocked, because going from my existence as a little princess to this dingy barn, we went upstairs and it started getting dark, and there were big black spiders everywhere, and there was just hay and stuff in the hay rustling. Must have been mice. And I cried and cried and cried. And she was very good to me. She came several times a day to see me, but I had to stay in this barn with nobody around because she was afraid that neighbors would find me. And
How
she
long did you
also
stay?
told me that if anybody came, I had to make myself very, very small. and hide and keep quiet. And I was being quite bratty. I was stomping my feet and yelling, saying, I want to go home. I want my mommy. I don't like it here. It smells. But you know, you can get used to things. And I was there for 3 whole months on my own. And I got used to being there. I even made friends with one of the spiders. And I tied a string on his leg and he became my pet. But then the leg came off and I was very unhappy about that. But, you know, I managed to somehow amuse myself and stay alive in this place. And one day, very early in the morning, I hear a commotion. I look through the gaps in the barn, and there are 3 soldiers wearing green uniforms with black feathers in their hats. They had big guns with bayonets and they're smacking this poor woman around. They're hitting her and say, where's the Jew? We know you're hiding a Jew. Where's the Jew? And she's bleeding from the nose. And she says, it's no Jew. Go to my house and have a look. And they go up to her house and they ransack her house because there's no Jew there and they're angry. And then they decide to leave. And as they go past the barn, one of them says, wait a minute. Maybe the Jew is hiding in the barn. And I hear them coming up the stairs with their big boots, and I scooch under the eaves and I pull the hay over my head and I make myself really, really small and I try not to breathe. But my heart is beating so hard that I'm afraid they can hear it. It was like a drum and I was afraid they would hear my heart beating. And they kept coming closer and closer, using the bayonets to look through the hay. It was loose hay. And I open one eye and there's a big black boot standing right next to my face, and the bayonet comes down about an inch from my cheek and it gets embedded in the wood. And then he pulls it out. And I think that's when I realized what it means to die. Even as a child, I realized that somebody was going to stick a knife in my head, and that was probably what death is like. And then they left, they went away. And, you know, I couldn't even stand up. This poor woman came up and she says, are you all right? And I couldn't answer. I couldn't talk. I couldn't stand up. I was very quiet after that. I didn't argue with her anymore.
Sophie. How long did you stay in the barn? How
3
long?
months, 3
3
months,
months.
which for a 5-year-old is a long time.
Of course. How large was your family?
My father had 9 brothers and sisters. There was a total of 28 members of my Jewish family. I'm the only survivor.
Out of 21?
28 people, yes.
Okay.
And I was in the little Jewish kindergarten, 52 kids. Only another one survived as well. It was a girl who was hidden by a maid in an attic. And I ran into her years later in London. I went to a cocktail party and I heard a woman speaking who sounded like me. And I went up to her and I said, who are you? And we started talking and I realized this was the child that I went to kindergarten with, and we fell on each other sobbing. It was an amazing experience. But what are the chances? What are the chances of this happening in the middle of London? I mean, really. It was amazing. Unfortunately, she passed away, but it was a wonderful historical thing for me.
Has to be. Let me ask another question. Are you surprised to see the recent rise in anti-Semitism around the country? And
I'm not surprised. I'm dismayed. It's more than surprise. And you know, when I saw those people marching with their tiki torches, the faces were exactly the same people who marched in Hungary. The hatred on their faces was identical. Hatred doesn't know history or time. Nasty people were the same then as they are now, and it's very, very scary. And you know, I think the only difference is that I don't think it could happen in America to the same extent, because we are not tribal. Europe is tribal. Everybody in Europe is English or French or Hungarian. In America, everybody is a mixture. There is no such thing as an American race. So it's much harder for them to gang up on another race, because everybody's mixed. And that's probably what's going to save us. I also think this new generation that's in school now is extraordinary. They're not prejudiced. They don't care if you're blue, green, yellow, gay, straight, Jew, Muslim. They don't care. And they worry about the environment. They don't care about money and riches. They all think they'll end up in their parents' basement when they're 55 anyway. But you know, they are a different generation. And I'm very proud of our governor, because he signed into law a thing that I sponsored it, basically teaching Holocaust and genocide studies in all New Hampshire schools. And it was signed into law just before COVID started. And I remember going to the State House and having them sign this thing, vote on this thing. And, you know, I felt like my whole family were behind me in those seats. I felt such an incredible pride and achievement to have been able to do that. And I'm hoping that that might help, because when you teach children about what can happen, you know, basically Nazism is bullying on steroids. And if you just teach them that you start by bullying, and you can push somebody and you can hate somebody and it can lead to genocide, children understand that. They don't want it to happen.
So when you went to the school with the governor, what was the message you delivering?
Oh, it was wonderful. First of all, he was very happy to go with me. We went to several schools. We have this wonderful double act. He's a wonderful speaker. And, you know, one of the things that he said, which I've never heard a politician say, he said to the kids, you know, kids, my generation screwed up. We're not leaving you the world the way we would like to. And I think that's a big admission. And he basically speaks against hatred and prejudice. And then he introduces me and says, here's somebody who went through it. And, you know, it's easier for kids to understand one little girl's story than 6 million, because the numbers are so huge. But when they think of one kid, of what a child can lose, and especially as they have fathers and mothers, and they can understand that it was terrible to do that to a small child, they can relate much better. And this is what he's trying to show, that, you know, hatred has no place in our country. It shouldn't.
And what was the reaction of the students?
Of the students was wonderful. It was a love fest. Honestly, this was before we had to wear masks. They all came up and kissed us. I mean, there was like a mob, you know, it was like a pop star, you know. They all came up and they hugged and kissed and touched, you know. They wanted to touch survivors, you know. I told them, this is your last chance, you know, to touch a survivor. Should have started charging $1 a hug. It was wonderful. We had several of these. One school, we had 750 kids listening. Wow. One high school. I mean, it was amazing. Unfortunately, with COVID, this stopped at the moment, but I hope to resume it. I hope to resume it, because I think it makes a big difference. All I can say is that, you know, you've got to tolerate and love. My real religion is love. You know, people say to you, well, what's your religion? I said, my religion is love. I just truly believe that hatred is not going to triumph over love. It's a battle now between good and evil, and good has to win. All I can say is, please love each other and tolerate each other. Tolerate and love your enemy.
I've known you for many, many years. You're just an amazing person, inspiration to so many people. And
thank you.
I want to thank you so much for doing this.